The day had been long and uneventful, a typical Tuesday that blended into the monotony of the week. I awoke to the harsh blare of the alarm at 6 a.m., its insistent ringing piercing through the remnants of sleep. I groaned, fumbling to silence it, and slowly dragged myself out of bed. The familiar scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted from the kitchen, a comforting ritual that had started every morning for as long as I could remember. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the lingering fatigue, and made my way downstairs. Claire was already in the kitchen, moving with practiced efficiency as she prepared breakfast. She was dressed in her usual business attire, a tailored navy blouse and a pencil skirt that hugged her figure. Her hair was neatly styled, not a strand out of place, and her makeup was subtle yet flawless. She looked every bit the successful professional she was, but there was something different about her this morning, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Good morning, sweetie," I mumbled, leaning in to kiss her cheek. She responded with a quick peck, her attention more on the eggs sizzling in the pan than on me. "Morning," she replied, her tone distant as she flipped the eggs onto a plate and handed it to me. "I've got a big day at the office. New project kicking off." "Sounds exciting," I said, though my mind was already wandering to the presentation I had to deliver later that day. Work had been demanding lately, and the stress was beginning to take its toll. Still, we exchanged the usual small talk as we ate, the conversation flowing out of habit more than genuine interest. I told her about my upcoming meeting, and she nodded absently, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. As we finished breakfast and prepared to leave, I leaned in to kiss her goodbye. It was then that I noticed a faint, unfamiliar scent lingering around her neck, something sweet, floral, and entirely unlike her usual perfume. "You're wearing something different today," I remarked casually, a small smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "It smells nice." Claire looked up at me, and for a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something playful, almost mischievous. "Just thought I'd try something new," she said, her lips curling into a small, enigmatic smile. Before I could say anything more, she was out the door, leaving me standing there with a strange, unsettled feeling in the pit of my stomach. The day dragged on with the usual routine. Meetings, emails, and more meetings. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was off, but I pushed it to the back of my mind, focusing instead on getting through the day. By the time I finally made it home, the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the neighborhood. The house was quiet when I entered, save for the soft hum of the television coming from the living room. I made my way upstairs to change out of my work clothes. As I reached the top of the stairs, I noticed that the bedroom door was slightly ajar, a soft light spilling out into the hallway. Curious, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. That's when I saw her. Claire was standing in front of the full-length mirror, her back to me as she adjusted the straps of a crimson lace lingerie set that clung to her curves in all the right places. The sight took me by surprise, a sharp contrast to the routine, almost mechanical interactions we'd had earlier. We hadn't been intimate in weeks, perhaps even months, and seeing her like this dressed in something so daring, so unlike her usual self, sent a jolt of desire and confusion through me. "Sweetie, where are we going tonight?" I asked, a playful grin spreading across my face as I leaned against the doorframe, half expecting her to turn around with a teasing smile. But Claire didn't turn. She didn't smile. Instead, she met my gaze through the mirror, her eyes cold and detached, a smirk playing on her lips. "Oh, shut up. You're staying home tonight," she said, her voice laced with a venom I'd never heard before. "I'm gonna spend a wild night with my lover, Jake. Remember our son's best friend? He promised to satisfy me until morning." Her words struck me like a physical blow, each one landing with a weight that knocked the breath out of my lungs. Jake? Our son's best friend? The boy who had practically grown up in our home, who had shared countless dinners and holidays with us. My mind raced, trying to comprehend what she had just said. The anger welled up inside me, but I forced myself to stay calm, to keep control. "What the hell makes you think I'll tolerate this for even a second?" I shouted, my voice trembling with a mix of fury and disbelief. Finally, Claire turned to face me, her expression unrecognizable, twisted with a mixture of arrogance and defiance. "Because you can't stop me," she said simply, her voice cold and final. She watched me for a moment, as if daring me to challenge her, then turned on her heel and walked out of the room, her laughter echoing down the hallway. I stood there, frozen, my mind reeling. This wasn't the woman I had married. This wasn't the life we had built together. Something inside me snapped, a dark resolve hardening in my chest. I wouldn't let her get away with this. Not without consequences. I paced the living room, my mind consumed by a whirlwind of rage and betrayal that refused to settle. Claire and I had been married for over 20 years, 2 decades of shared dreams, laughter, and love. We had raised our son, Alex, together, guiding him through the trials of adolescence and into the threshold of adulthood. And yet, all of it now felt like a cruel joke, a mirage that had shattered in the blink of an eye. As I paced, my eyes drifted to the mantel above the fireplace, where a series of picture frames stood like silent witnesses to a life that no longer felt real. Photographs of our family, frozen in time, stared back at me. There was the picture of Claire and me on our honeymoon, both of us beaming with the naive optimism of newlyweds. Next to it, a photo of the 3 of us at Alex's high school graduation, our smiles wide with pride and hope for the future. And then there was the one of Alex and Jake, arms slung around each other's shoulders, both grinning like idiots on the day they won their first soccer championship. My fists clenched involuntarily at the thought of Jake. The young man I had once considered like a second son was now the embodiment of my greatest betrayal. How long had this been going on? How many times had he walked through my front door, laughed at my jokes, eaten at my table, all while secretly stabbing me in the back? The thought made my blood boil, a white-hot anger searing through me with every passing second. I couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind, the way Claire had looked at me with that smirk, the coldness in her voice when she had said his name. It was as if she had been a stranger, a woman I had never truly known. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was that they had made a fool of me, and I couldn't know. I wouldn't let them get away with it. I sank onto the couch, the soft cushions offering no comfort as I stared blankly at the pictures on the mantel. Memories of happier times taunted me, the smiles in those photos now mocking, a cruel reminder of what I had lost. I reached for one of the frames, the one of Claire and me at our wedding. My hand hovered over it, fingers trembling with a mixture of sorrow and fury. But I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Instead, I let my hand drop back to my side, the weight of it too heavy to bear. How had it come to this? What had I missed? I replayed every conversation, every interaction with Claire and Jake, searching for signs, for anything that could have warned me. But there was nothing. Just the slow, insidious decay of trust that had gone unnoticed until it was too late. My thoughts turned to Alex. What would he think? How would he react if he knew? He and Jake had been inseparable since childhood, their friendship one of the few constants in a world that seemed to change too quickly. The idea of telling him the truth made my stomach churn with dread. But this wasn't about Alex. This was about me, about what they had done to me. And I wasn't going to let it slide. The ticking of the clock grew louder, more insistent, as if urging me to move, to act. I knew I couldn't sit here stewing in my own anger forever. The time for reflection had passed. Now was the time for action. My gaze shifted to the door. The initial shock of Claire's betrayal had worn off, replaced by a single, unwavering focus: revenge. The thought of confronting them, of making them pay for what they had done, was like a balm to the raw wound inside me. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate as I walked to the door. My hand reached for the keys on the table by the door, the metal cool and solid in my grasp. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the adrenaline beginning to course through my veins, sharpening my senses. I hesitated for just a moment, my mind flashing back to all the years we had spent together, all the memories we had made. But the pain of betrayal quickly snuffed out any lingering doubts. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about betrayal, about being made a fool in my own home. With a deep breath, I gripped the keys tighter and opened the door. The cool night air hit me like a slap, jolting me fully into the present. I stepped outside, the quiet of the neighborhood stark in contrast to the storm raging inside me. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not without consequences. The calm before the storm was over. Now, it was time to unleash the fury they had awakened. The night had settled in, a blanket of darkness draped over the town, punctuated only by the dim glow of the streetlights. They cast long, eerie shadows as I trailed Claire's car, keeping a safe distance between us. My heart pounded in my chest. Every turn she made, every slight change in speed, I mirrored with precision. She was headed towards the outskirts of town, to the place where Jake lived, a small, secluded house nestled away from prying eyes. Perfect, I thought, a cold satisfaction creeping into my mind. No one would hear them scream. As we approached Jake's neighborhood, I eased off the gas, letting her car pull ahead just enough so that my presence wouldn't be detected. The streets were deserted, the silence broken only by the distant hum of a passing car or the occasional bark of a dog. I watched as Claire's car finally turned into Jake's driveway, her taillights briefly illuminating the driveway before they winked out, plunging the area into darkness once more. I parked a few houses down, the engine barely a whisper as I killed the lights and sat there, cloaked in the shadows. I could see her through the windshield as she stepped out of the car, glancing around with a nervous energy that made my heart race even faster. She was jittery, like she knew what she was doing was wrong. But the thrill of it, the thrill of the forbidden, pushed her forward. She hurried up to the front door, looking over her shoulder one last time before slipping inside. The door clicked shut, and the house swallowed her whole. For a moment, I stayed where I was. I had time. There was no rush. I needed to be methodical, to let the rage simmer just beneath the surface without letting it boil over. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was going to be justice. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely just a few minutes, I slipped out of the car, moving with the quiet precision of a predator stalking its prey. The night was still, the only sounds the occasional rustle of leaves stirred by a gentle breeze. I stuck to the shadows, my steps deliberate and soundless on the pavement as I approached Jake's house. I circled around the side, staying close to the wall where the darkness was deepest. The house was small, single-story, with a few windows lining the sides. Each was a potential vantage point, but I needed to choose carefully. My breath was shallow, controlled, as I edged closer to one of the side windows. I peered inside, careful to stay hidden in the shadows. There they were, Jake and Claire, wrapped in each other's arms, their bodies entwined in a sickening display of betrayal. The sight of them together, so close, so intimate, made my blood boil. My vision blurred with the intensity of my anger, but I forced myself to remain calm, to stay focused. This wasn't the time for rage. This was the time for careful, calculated action. I watched them for a moment longer, the way they moved together, oblivious to the world around them. It disgusted me, but it also fueled the fire inside me. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when I would make them pay for what they had done. I crouched down, moving silently along the wall to the back of the house where the shadows were thickest. The night was my ally, cloaking me in its darkness as I reached for the small bag I had brought with me. Inside were the tools of my revenge, tools I had carefully selected, each one chosen for the role it would play in the night's events. I paused, taking a deep breath to steady myself. My mind briefly wandered to the idea of calling the police, of exposing them as the cheaters they were. But that wouldn't be enough. That would be too easy, too clean. They needed to suffer, to feel the pain they had inflicted on me, to understand the depth of their betrayal. From the bag, I pulled out a pair of gloves and slipped them on, the leather snug against my skin. Then, I carefully unwrapped a small crowbar, its weight solid and reassuring in my hand. I tested it lightly against the palm of my hand, feeling the cold steel vibrate against my skin. This was going to be my instrument of justice, the tool with which I would dismantle the world they had so carelessly built on lies. The basement door was just ahead, a simple lock, the only thing standing between me and them. I knelt by the door, the crowbar poised in my hand, ready to slip it between the door and the frame. But before I made my move, I hesitated. I needed to be sure. I needed to hear them, to confirm that they were alone, that they were comfortable, that they thought they were safe. I crept to another window, this one slightly ajar, allowing a sliver of sound to escape. Their voices drifted out, low and murmur-like, punctuated by occasional laughter. Claire's laugh was soft, tinged with a breathy excitement that made my stomach turn. Jake's voice was deep, confident, the voice of a man who believed he was in control. But tonight, he wasn't. Tonight, they were in my world. My grip tightened on the crowbar. It was time. I moved back to the door, slid the crowbar into place, and with a quick, practiced motion, popped the lock. The door creaked open, and I slipped inside, swallowed by the darkness of the house. The stalker's path had begun. I moved silently, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet underfoot. My eyes locked on the faint glow of light spilling out from the living room ahead. Their laughter reached my ears, a soft, intimate moaning sounds that made my blood boil. They were wrapped in each other's, lost in the sickening bliss of their treachery, completely unaware of the storm that was about to descend upon them. I could hear them talking in low, hushed voices, their words laced with promises of passion and pleasure. It made my stomach churn, the bile rising in my throat, but I swallowed it down. This wasn't the time for nausea. This was the time for action. I crept closer, my heart pounding in my chest, a drumbeat of fury and anticipation. The bag of tools I clutched in my hand felt heavier with each step, the weight of it a physical reminder of what I was about to do. The knife inside the bag called to me, its cold steel practically vibrating with the dark energy of what was to come. I had planned every detail, rehearsed it in my mind until it was as familiar as breathing. There would be no mistakes, no hesitation. With a sudden, violent burst of energy, I lunged into the room, the element of surprise working in my favor. They barely had time to register my presence before I was upon them, my hand moving with lightning speed as I drew the knife and pressed its cold, unforgiving blade against Jake's throat. "Did you really think you could do this and get away with it?" I hissed, my voice low and menacing, laced with the venom of a man who had been pushed too far. Claire's scream shattered the silence, piercing the air like a blade through flesh. She scrambled off the couch, her eyes wide with terror, her hands trembling as she backed away. "What are you doing? Are you insane?" she cried, her voice high-pitched and frantic, but her words only fueled the fire burning inside me. Jake's eyes darted around, panic and disbelief etched into his face as he tried to struggle against my grip. But I tightened my hold, pressing the blade deeper into his flesh until I saw a thin line of blood appear, a crimson warning of what was to come. "You betrayed me, both of you," I snarled, my voice trembling with barely suppressed fury. "And now, you're going to pay." The room seemed to close in around us, the walls pulsing with the echoes of their fear. I could see the realization dawning on their faces, the understanding that this wasn't just a moment of madness, this was a reckoning. Claire's bravado melted away, replaced by raw, naked fear as she backed into a corner, her hands clutching at her chest as if she could somehow protect herself from the inevitable. "Please," she whimpered, her voice cracking under the weight of her terror. "We didn't mean for this to happen. It just for fun." I laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that seemed to fill the room, suffocating the last remnants of hope they might have clung to. "You think that makes it better? You think I care about your excuses? You made your choices. Now you'll live or die with them." I forced Jake to his knees, dragging him towards the basement door, the darkness beyond it a perfect reflection of the abyss that had opened up inside me. Claire followed, her movements jerky and hesitant, like a puppet being dragged by invisible strings. I could see the panic in her eyes, the way she glanced around the room, searching for some way out, some miracle that would save them. But there was none. This was the end of the line. "Downstairs," I commanded, my voice cold and devoid of any emotion. They hesitated, but one look at the knife, now slick with Jake's blood, and they obeyed, stumbling down the stairs into the cold, unforgiving darkness of the basement. The basement was damp, the air heavy with the scent of mold and decay. It was a far cry from the warm, comfortable living room upstairs, a place designed for pleasure and relaxation. Down here, there was only darkness, only the creeping cold that seeped into your bones and made you feel like you were already dead. I flipped on the single, dim bulb that hung from the ceiling, its weak light casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. Claire and Jake huddled together, their faces pale, their bodies trembling with fear. They were pathetic, small, reduced to nothing more than scared animals caught in a trap. I savored the sight, letting it feed the dark satisfaction growing inside me. "You thought you could betray me and just walk away?" I said, my voice echoing in the confined space. "You thought you could destroy everything I've built and not suffer the consequences?" Jake tried to speak, his voice shaky, barely a whisper. "Please, I'm sorry. We didn't want to hurt you." I stepped closer, the knife glinting in the dim light as I pointed it at him. "You're sorry? Sorry doesn't cut it, Jake. Sorry doesn't undo the damage you've done. And now, you're going to feel every ounce of the pain you've caused me." They began to beg, their voices overlapping, a cacophony of pleas for mercy that fell on deaf ears. I was beyond mercy, beyond reason. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice, about making them feel every moment of the agony they had inflicted on me. With a swift, brutal motion, I slashed the blade across Jake's arm, his scream piercing the air as blood spattered across the cold, concrete floor. Claire shrieked, her hands flying to her mouth as she watched in horror. But I wasn't done. Not even close. This was just the beginning. The night was far from over, and so was their suffering. The basement had become a chamber of horrors, where every dark corner echoed with the lingering screams that had filled the night. Their cries had once pierced the air, frantic and desperate, now replaced by an unsettling silence. The floor was slick with blood, glistening under the faint, flickering light of the single bulb that hung above. The air was thick, heavy with the metallic scent of blood and the oppressive weight of death. I stood in the midst of it all, my breathing ragged, the knife still clutched in my hand, its blade stained crimson. Claire had been the first to break, her once defiant eyes now wide with terror, a far cry from the woman who had laughed in my face just hours before. Her pleas for mercy had come too late, falling on ears that had long since lost the capacity for compassion. Her betrayal had cut deeper than any wound I could inflict, and no amount of screaming could undo the damage she had done to my soul. "Please, stop, please," she had begged, her voice hoarse from the strain, her hands outstretched as if she could somehow ward off the inevitable. But I had only looked at her with cold, unfeeling eyes, the knife in my hand steady as I delivered the final, brutal cuts. Each slice was methodical, calculated, designed to prolong the suffering as much as possible. I wanted her to feel every ounce of the pain she had inflicted on me, wanted her to know that this was the price of betrayal. Jake had been no better, his bravado crumbling the moment I had turned my attention to him. The young man who had once been so full of confidence, so sure of himself, had been reduced to a quivering, broken shell. His eyes, once filled with arrogance, now shone with tears, his voice trembling as he begged for his life. "I'm sorry, please. I didn't mean for this to happen," he had whispered, his words choked with fear. I had laughed then, a bitter, hollow sound that seemed to fill the room. "You didn't mean for this to happen?" I had echoed, my voice dripping with venom. "You think that matters? You think I care? You betrayed me, Jake. You both did. And now, you'll pay for it." His screams had been the loudest, reverberating off the concrete walls as I exacted my revenge. Every lash of the knife, every punch, every ounce of suffering I inflicted was a twisted balm for the wound they had carved into my soul. It wasn't enough, it could never be enough, but it was all I had left to give. I wanted to tear them apart, to rip them to shreds, to make them feel every bit of the agony they had caused me. The first light of dawn began to filter through the small, dirty window in the corner of the basement, casting a pale, gray glow over the scene of carnage. The bodies of Claire and Jake lay lifeless on the cold, concrete floor, their faces frozen in expressions of pain and terror. The silence that filled the room was almost deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos that had preceded it. I stood over them, breathing heavily, my hands slick with their blood, my clothes stained with the evidence of my vengeance. But there was no satisfaction in their deaths, no real sense of closure. I had imagined this moment so many times, had pictured it in my mind, relished in the thought of making them suffer. But now, as I looked down at their lifeless forms, I felt nothing. No remorse, no regret, just a cold, hollow emptiness where my soul used to be. I turned away from the gruesome scene, my movements slow, deliberate, as if I were in a trance. The basement seemed to close in around me, the walls pulsing with the echoes of their final moments. I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last, my body exhausted from the night's events. As I reached the top of the stairs, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror that hung on the wall, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the man staring back at me. His face was a mask of blood and sweat, his eyes dark, empty. He was a stranger, a shadow of the man I had once been. The life I had known was over, destroyed by the very hands that had once built it. I had become something else, something darker, something twisted by pain and betrayal. But that didn't matter now. There was still one final task to complete. I walked through the house, the morning light filtering through the windows, casting long shadows on the walls. The house was silent, empty, the only sound the soft creak of the floorboards beneath my feet. I reached the front door and paused, my hand resting on the doorknob. This was it, the end of the line. There was nothing left for me here, nothing left to fight for. I stepped outside, the cool morning air hitting my face, washing away the last remnants of the night's horrors. The world seemed eerily calm, as if unaware of the carnage that had just taken place. I walked to my car, the keys in my hand trembling slightly as I unlocked the door. I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar feel of the leather beneath me a stark contrast to the blood on my hands. As I started the engine, I took one last look at the house, at the place where it had all ended. The memories of what had happened here would haunt me forever, but I pushed them aside. I had no choice. There was still one more thing I had to do. The drive home was a blur, my thoughts lost in the storm of what I had done. The road ahead was empty, the early morning sky a dull gray as the sun struggled to break through the clouds. The adrenaline that had fueled me through the night was fading, replaced by a cold, numbing fatigue. The events in the basement replayed in my mind, but I shoved them aside. There was no time for reflection, no time for guilt. Not yet. When I pulled into the driveway, the house seemed eerily still, as if it too sensed the darkness I carried with me. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching underfoot, and paused at the front door, taking a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back now. As I entered, the familiar scent of home filled my nostrils, coffee, faint traces of last night's dinner, the subtle hint of laundry detergent. It was a comforting smell, one that belonged to a life that was now gone. The living room was dimly lit, the curtains still drawn, casting long shadows across the room. Everything was just as I had left it, yet everything felt different. "Dad?" Alex's voice cut through the silence, and I turned to see him standing in the hallway, his face pale and drawn. His eyes were wide with worry, dark circles underlining the sleepless night he'd clearly endured. "Dad, where have you been? I was worried sick." His voice was a mix of relief and confusion, tinged with the fear of the unknown. For a moment, I just looked at him, my son, the boy I'd raised, now a young man on the brink of his own life. The boy who had always trusted me, always looked to me for guidance. The weight of what I had to tell him was almost too much to bear, but he deserved the truth. He needed to know what had been done and why. "There's something I need to tell you, son," I said quietly, my voice betraying the exhaustion I felt. I gestured towards the living room, and he followed me in, his brow furrowed in concern. We sat down on the couch, the same couch where we'd shared so many conversations, so many memories. But this time was different. This time, there was no comfort to be found in familiarity. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself for what was to come. "Alex, your mother, Claire, she's been having an affair with Jake." The words felt like stones in my mouth, heavy and hard to expel. I watched as the realization hit him, his face going through a series of emotions: shock, disbelief, and then a cold, hard anger that settled in his eyes. "What?" he breathed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Jake? My best friend?" I nodded, the weight of it all pressing down on me. I confronted them last night. I followed them to his house. And I couldn't let it go, Alex. I couldn't just stand by and let them destroy everything. So, I took matters into my own hands. The room fell into a heavy silence, the kind that suffocates, where every second stretches into an eternity. I could see the gears turning in Alex's mind, the struggle to comprehend, to reconcile the father he knew with the man sitting before him. I braced myself for his response, for the horror, the revulsion that would surely follow. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, steady. "They deserved it," he said simply, his tone devoid of emotion. "They betrayed us both." I blinked, taken aback by the coldness in his words. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw no fear, no disgust, only a hard, steely resolve that mirrored my own. This wasn't the boy I had raised, the boy who had once been full of life and innocence. This was a man, shaped by betrayal, hardened by the same fire that had consumed me. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our shared understanding settling between us. There was no need for more words. We both knew what had to be done. "Come on," I said finally, standing up and extending a hand to him. "We need to take care of this." He nodded, rising to his feet without hesitation. Together, we moved through the house with a grim determination, gathering the necessary tools and supplies. The task ahead was grim, but it had to be done. There was no room for doubt, no space for regret. In the garage, we retrieved the plastic sheeting, the cleaning supplies, and the heavy-duty garbage bags. The sun was just beginning to rise as we loaded the supplies into the trunk of the car, its pale light casting long shadows across the driveway. There was a chill in the air, a reminder that the world was still turning, that life was still moving forward even as ours stood on the brink of darkness. We drove in silence, the road ahead a blur as we made our way back to Jake's house. There was no need for conversation, no need to articulate the thoughts that ran through our minds. We were united in purpose, father and son, bound by blood and betrayal. When we arrived, the house stood silent, a testament to the night's events. We moved quickly, efficiently, our actions synchronized as we went about the grim task of erasing any trace of what had happened. The basement was a mess, the blood-stained concrete floor a stark reminder of the violence that had occurred. But we worked without hesitation, scrubbing, cleaning, disposing of the evidence with a precision born of necessity. The bodies were wrapped in plastic, the weight of them heavy as we carried them to the car. There was no emotion, no hesitation, just the cold, methodical process of tying up loose ends. By the time we were done, the sun had fully risen, casting a warm, golden light over the world outside. But inside, we were still shrouded in darkness. We stood side by side in the driveway, the last remnants of the night's work disappearing in the rearview mirror as we drove away. The road ahead was long, but we were united in our silence, our resolve. The man I had once been was gone, replaced by something darker, something colder. But as I glanced at Alex beside me, I knew that he understood. We were both changed, both marked by what had been done. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, I realized that we were no longer just father and son. We were something more now, something forged in the fire of betrayal and revenge. And in that moment, I knew that there was no going back.